Christmas night in Colorado arrived quietly, the kind of cold that felt clean and harmless at first. Snow fell in thin, steady lines, barely audible as it touched the darkened roads and pine-covered slopes. Evan Mercer zipped his jacket in the glow of his parents' porch light, phone pressed between shoulder and ear, smiling as he promised he wouldn't be out long. "It's just a quick thing," he said. "Lucas knows a spot. We'll be back before midnight." Inside the house, laughter drifted from the living room, mixed with the smell of cinnamon and cooked meat. Evan hesitated for half a second before stepping into the cold, as if something unseen tugged at him from behind. Then he shook it off, climbed into his car, and drove toward the mountains. Lucas had texted earlier, "Snow looks unreal up here," followed by a grainy photo of white dusted trees lit by headlights. Mara added a voice note soon after, her tone light but breathless, joking about how Christmas hikes were becoming their thing. It felt harmless, familiar, the kind of decision people made without thinking twice. By the time Evan reached the meeting point, the Forest Service road was already coated in ice. Lucas's truck sat idling, headlights cutting tunnels through the snow. Mara leaned against the passenger door, stomping her boots to stay warm. They exchanged hugs, quick and careless, their breath visible in short bursts. They didn't notice the wind picking up. The trailhead sign was half buried, the path beyond it swallowed by darkness and drifting snow. Lucas joked about how quiet everything felt, how it was like the world had paused just for them. Evan checked his phone, 2 bars of signal, and sent a quick message home, "All good. Talk later." That was the last message anyone would ever receive from him. The hike started easily enough, their boots crunching over packed snow, headlamps bobbing as they laughed and talked over one another. But the farther they went, the deeper the snow became, and the quieter the forest felt. Sounds dulled. Distances blurred. Time stretched thin. Somewhere between jokes and shivering silence, Evan realized he could no longer tell how long they'd been walking. When he checked his phone again, the signal was gone. By midnight, the road Evan had driven earlier lay empty, snow smoothing over his tire tracks as if they'd never existed. Back at his parents' house, the porch light remained on, casting a yellow circle onto untouched snow. His mother checked her phone, then checked again, assuming the cold had drained his battery. An hour passed. Then 2. Calls went unanswered. Messages stayed unread. At first, concern came softly, wrapped in excuses. They're late. They lost track of time. The weather's slowing them down. But beneath every rational thought was a growing weight, heavy and unspoken. By early morning, the snow had thickened, and the mountains had closed in on themselves. Somewhere deep within that silence, 3 friends were no longer moving forward. And far away, a phone buzzed once, briefly, before going dead. No one saw it. No one heard it. But that single moment would become the last trace anyone had of them, and the only clue leading into the long, frozen hours that followed. The phone buzzed for less than a second before the screen went dark again. Evan didn't feel it vibrate in his pocket. His fingers were already numb, joints stiffening as he stood under the trees, breath coming out uneven and loud inside his hood. Snow clung to his eyelashes, melting just long enough to blur his vision before freezing again. Somewhere ahead, Lucas's headlamp flickered, the beam cutting weakly through the falling white. "Hold up," Evan said, his voice thinner than he expected. "We need to stop." Lucas turned, irritation flashing across his face before concern replaced it. Mara lingered a few steps behind, shoulders hunched, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The trail they thought they'd been following had vanished, erased by wind and fresh snow. Nothing looked familiar anymore. Evan pulled his phone out, hoping the cold hadn't killed it completely. The screen lit up dimly, struggling. 1 bar appeared, then disappeared. For a heartbeat, a map loaded, frozen, incomplete, but enough to send something out into the dark. That brief signal reached a tower miles away. Then it was gone. Lucas swore under his breath. "We should have turned back earlier." Mara didn't answer. She was staring into the trees, listening to something only she seemed to hear. The forest felt different now. Heavier, closer. Snow fell harder, driven sideways by gusts of wind that cut through their layers like knives. They tried to retrace their steps, but every direction looked the same. Evan felt panic crawl up his chest, tight and hot against the cold. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think. Stopping meant freezing. Moving meant getting more lost. "Let's keep going downhill," he said. "Water runs down. Roads do too." Lucas hesitated, then nodded. It was the only plan they had. Miles away, that failed signal registered as a single location point. An accidental digital footprint stamped into the system at 12:41 a.m. It showed Evan's phone near a Forest Service road that no longer appeared on newer maps, swallowed years earlier by closures and snowdrifts. By the time anyone looked at that data, the meaning would already be blurred by time and weather. Back in town, Mara's phone sat untouched on her nightstand, alarms silenced by distance. Her mother woke before dawn, uneasy for reasons she couldn't explain. Evan's father checked the driveway, frowning at the untouched snow, telling himself not to overreact. Lucas's sister sent a message, "You alive?" and laughed when it didn't go through. None of them knew that somewhere in the mountains, three voices were growing quieter. The wind picked up again, forcing the friends to huddle behind a stand of trees. Lucas tried lighting a small fire, hands shaking as the lighter sparked uselessly against damp wood. Mara started crying without warning, the sound sharp and sudden, then quickly muffled as if she were ashamed of it. "We're okay," Evan said, though he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. "We just need daylight." But daylight felt impossibly far away. As the night stretched on, exhaustion set in, pulling at their thoughts, slowing their movements. Evan checked his phone one last time before shoving it deep into his pocket to conserve what little battery remained. The screen stayed black. Hours later, as Christmas morning began to touch the town below with pale light, that single lost signal would become a question mark on a map. Investigators would circle it. Families would cling to it. Searchers would argue over what it meant. For now, it was just a silent record of a moment when hope briefly reached out. And failed. By the time the sun rose fully, the concern waiting at home would turn into something heavier, something official, as unanswered calls finally became impossible to ignore. Christmas morning arrived without celebration. Snow still fell, quieter now, settling into corners and softening the world outside. Evan's parents woke to silence, the house stripped of its warmth from the night before. The tree lights blinked patiently in the living room, gifts still tucked beneath branches that suddenly felt ornamental, meaningless. His mother reached for her phone before her feet touched the floor. No messages. She told herself it was nothing. Evan had always slept late. College kids lost track of time. Snowstorms delayed plans. She brewed coffee, let it cool untouched, and checked again. Still nothing. Across town, Mara's mother stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at a white-covered backyard, replaying her daughter's last voice note from the night before. "We won't be long," Mara had said, laughing. "Just wanted some fresh air." The memory felt wrong now, hollowed out by the quiet that followed. Lucas's sister was the first to say the words out loud. "This isn't normal." By mid-morning, phones buzzed between households, cautious at first, then urgent. None of the three had made it home. No one had heard from them. Each call ended the same way, with long pauses and shared denial, as if speaking the fear might make it real. The snow made everything harder. Roads were slow. Offices were closed. Even the police station ran on holiday staff, the town moving at half speed while panic accelerated beneath the surface. When Evan's father finally called the non-emergency line, his voice stayed calm until it didn't. He explained the hike, the time, the lack of contact. The officer on the other end listened carefully, then asked questions that felt rehearsed. Had they packed supplies? Were they experienced hikers? Could they have stayed with friends? Hope slipped into the gaps of those questions, fragile but necessary. By noon, the excuses began to fail. Weather reports confirmed worsening conditions overnight. Search and rescue volunteers were notified but warned that visibility would be poor. Snowfall totals erased trails within hours. Every delay felt like something being taken away. Mara's mother sat on the edge of her bed, gripping her phone as if it might ring through force alone. Lucas's sister drove the route toward the mountains, stopping when police tape blocked the road, staring up at the trees as if answers might fall from them. Inside the forest, Unseen and unheard, the cold deepened. The official missing persons report was filed shortly after 2 p.m. Names were typed into systems. Ages entered. Clothing descriptions recalled imperfectly through stress and guilt. A timestamp was attached to the last known contact, already feeling distant. The word missing carried weight none of them were prepared for. By late afternoon, a small group gathered near the ranger station, faces drawn, eyes red. Conversations drifted between optimism and dread. Someone mentioned how strong Evan was. Someone else talked about Lucas's outdoor experience. Mara's laugh was remembered too brightly, too vividly. No one spoke about what happened when the sun went down. As daylight faded, snowfall began again, heavier this time, thick flakes swallowing the landscape. Search teams prepared maps and radios, knowing morning would be their first real chance. Every passing hour felt like a quiet betrayal. When night returned to the mountains, Christmas ended officially. Hope remained, but it was thinner now, stretched tight against reality. Somewhere out there, 3 lives balanced on decisions already made, paths already chosen. And as darkness settled once more over Colorado, the search was no longer about waiting for a call. It was about finding something the snow was trying very hard to hide. The search began at first light, though light barely seemed like the right word for it. A gray haze hung over the mountains, flattening distance and swallowing sound. Snow continued to fall in thick, drifting sheets, undoing the night and the day before it. By the time the first search and rescue trucks reached the Forest Service Road, the world already looked untouched, as if no one had ever walked there at all. Boots crunched where the road ended, then stopped. There were no tracks. No tire marks. No signs of 3 people entering the woods less than 12 hours earlier. Fresh snow had filled every impression, smoothing the ground into something blank and unforgiving. Searchers spread out slowly, methodical, eyes trained downward for anything unnatural. A snapped branch. A scuffed rock. A dropped glove. Radios crackled with updates that led nowhere. Every direction looked identical, trees standing like quiet witnesses that refused to speak. Inside the forest, time moved differently. Evan stumbled forward, legs heavy, his body aching in places he didn't know could hurt. The snow reached nearly to his knees now, each step stealing more strength than the last. Lucas walked ahead, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the slope below them. Mara followed closely, her breathing shallow and uneven, her hands shaking no matter how tight she pulled her sleeves. They hadn't spoken in a long time. The wind howled through the trees, carrying snow sideways, erasing their own footprints seconds after they made them. Evan turned once, panic flashing through him as he realized there was nothing behind them. No proof they'd been there at all. "Wait," he said, his voice cracking. "We should mark something. A tree. Anything." Lucas stopped, frustration boiling over. "With what? We don't have time for this." Mara sank onto a fallen log, shoulders slumping. "I'm so tired." The words landed heavy. Dangerous. Evan knew what stopping meant. He forced himself to think, to plan, to keep fear from turning inward. They needed shelter. They needed rest without surrender. He scanned the forest until his eyes burned, searching for anything that might help them survive the night that still felt endless. Back above them, the search expanded. Dogs were brought in but struggled immediately, their training rendered useless by the fresh snowfall. Helicopters remained grounded, clouds too low, wind too strong. The forest refused cooperation at every turn. By afternoon, optimism began to thin. Maps were redrawn. Probabilities discussed quietly, professionally. The snow was winning, layer by layer, minute by minute, burying clues before anyone could see them. Even experienced searchers felt the weight of it, the helplessness that came when nature erased the past too efficiently. Deep in the woods, Evan's hands fumbled as he tried to pull off his gloves, fingers stiff and unresponsive. Lucas finally managed to light a small fire beneath a cluster of trees, shielding it with his body as the flame caught weakly. Mara stared at it, eyes glassy, lips moving silently. They were no longer just lost. They were cold, hungry, afraid. Night approached again, faster than any of them expected. The temperature dropped sharply, stealing breath, clarity, patience. The fire flickered, struggling against the wind, a fragile line between endurance and failure. Evan looked at his friends and saw something new in their faces. Not panic, not fear. Cracks. And as the snow continued to fall, erasing everything behind them, it became clear that survival would no longer be about finding the right direction, but about whether they could hold together long enough to keep moving at all. The fire didn't last. It shrank into embers just as the wind strengthened, scattering ash across the snow until even its warmth felt imaginary. Evan rubbed his hands together, breath coming out in ragged clouds, every movement slower than the last. His body ached with exhaustion, but his mind refused to rest. Lucas paced a short line back and forth, boots crunching softly, as if motion alone could keep panic away. "We can't stay here," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "If we stop, we're done." Mara didn't look up. She sat with her back against the tree, knees pulled tight to her chest, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the fire's remains. "We already stopped," she said quietly. The words hung between them, sharp and undeniable. Evan swallowed. He felt responsible, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe because he'd agreed to come. Maybe because he'd said everything would be fine. He forced himself to sound calm. "We rest for a bit. Then we move. Just enough to stay warm." Lucas snapped his head toward him. "You don't know that. You don't know anything." The anger surprised them both. Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Snow creaked as trees shifted under its weight. Somewhere far away, something moved through the forest, unseen. Mara began to cry again, softer this time, tears freezing against her cheeks. "I can't feel my feet," she whispered. "I think something's wrong." Evan crouched beside her, peeling back her boot just enough to check. Her sock was damp, her skin pale and frighteningly numb. He didn't say what he was thinking. Hypothermia. Frostbite. Words that felt too heavy to speak out loud. Lucas watched, guilt creeping into his expression. "We should have turned around," he said. "I should have listened." Evan shook his head. "This isn't about blame." But it was. Every choice replayed itself in his mind, branching into paths they hadn't taken. Turning back sooner. Bringing more supplies. Saying no. Each regret pressed harder as the cold settled deeper into their bones. They tried to walk again, but Mara stumbled after only a few steps, collapsing into the snow with a sharp cry. Lucas caught her under the arms, frustration flaring. "You have to move," he said, voice tight. "You can't just give up." "I'm not giving up," she snapped weakly. "I'm scared." The admission broke something open. Evan stepped between them, heart pounding. "We stick together," he said firmly. "We don't leave anyone behind." Lucas looked away, jaw clenched, the unspoken truth hanging heavy. Together meant slower. Slower meant colder. Colder meant dangerous choices no one wanted to name yet. Hours dragged on in fragments. They dozed in short, shallow bursts, waking in panic whenever the cold crept too close. Time lost meaning. Hunger gnawed. Thirst burned. The forest seemed endless, indifferent to their suffering. As dawn approached for the second time since they'd vanished, Evan noticed something strange in the snow nearby. A shallow depression, larger than a footprint. Then another. He followed them with his eyes, heart stuttering. Tracks. Not human. They were wide, deliberate, pressed deep into the snow and moving with purpose. Whatever made them had passed through recently, unbothered by the storm. Lucas crouched beside him, staring. "Elk," he said softly. Mara lifted her head, hope flickering weakly in her eyes. "Do they lead somewhere?" Evan didn't answer right away. He followed the line of tracks as they disappeared into the trees, cutting through the white like a quiet promise, or a warning. In that moment, as the cold pressed in and the fractures between them widened, the idea of following something else's path felt like the only option left. And without realizing it, they stood on the edge of a decision that would change everything. 48 hours after the last message was sent, the forest no longer felt like a place where people simply got lost. It felt like a place that kept things. The search resumed at dawn under a sky washed pale and indifferent. Snow still clung to the trees, though the storm had eased enough for helicopters to finally lift into the air. Their blades cut through the silence, scattering loose powder across the ground, revealing and hiding the truth at the same time. Search teams pushed farther than before, spreading into steeper terrain, places most hikers avoided in winter. Radios crackled with coordinates and cautious optimism. 2 days was still survivable. Barely. That belief carried them forward. Down below, Evan stood staring at the tracks again, his breath shallow as if afraid to disturb them. The elk prints pressed deep into the snow, steady and confident, heading downhill through dense trees. They hadn't wandered. They hadn't hesitated. "They know where they're going," Lucas said quietly. Mara leaned heavily against a trunk, her face pale, eyes sunken. "Animals don't get lost," she whispered. The logic felt thin, but it was something. Better than standing still. Better than waiting for cold to finish what exhaustion had started. They followed the tracks. Each step was slower now. Evan's legs shook uncontrollably, muscles rebelling against movement. Lucas took the lead, breaking through deeper drifts, stopping often to make sure Mara was still upright. She stumbled more than once, frustration flashing each time she fell, shame mixing with fear. "Don't apologize," Evan told her, hauling her back up. "Just keep moving." Hours passed in fragments. The forest changed subtly as they descended, trees thinning, wind easing. At one point, Evan thought he smelled something different beneath the snow. Damp wood. Old ash. He didn't mention it, afraid hope would only make things worse. Above them, one of the search dogs stopped suddenly, nose pressed to the ground. The handler froze, signaling for silence. The dog circled once, then again, tail stiff. "There," the handler said. "Something's different here." Beneath the snow, the ground was uneven, compacted in places that didn't match the terrain. A searcher crouched, brushing snow aside with gloved hands. The shape beneath wasn't human, but it wasn't random either. Tracks. Large ones. "They're fresh," someone said. "Not from the storm." Elk. The word moved quickly through the group, cautious excitement rising. Elk moved with purpose. They traveled routes shaped by instinct and survival, paths that often led to water, shelter, or lower ground. If the missing friends had followed them. "Mark it," the team lead said. "We follow." Back in the forest, Evan nearly missed it at first. A dark shape ahead, half buried beneath snow-laden branches. He stopped so suddenly Lucas walked into him. "What is it?" Lucas asked. Evan stepped closer, heart pounding. It was a fallen tree, its trunk creating a low, natural barrier from the wind. Beneath it, the snow was thinner, disturbed. Someone had been there. Mara sank to her knees, fingers brushing frozen ground. "Someone stayed here," she said. "We stayed here." The realization hit all at once. They hadn't imagined it. They hadn't wandered endlessly in circles. For the first time since Christmas night, proof existed that they had survived long enough to leave a mark. As the search teams followed the elk trail deeper into the forest, confidence grew with every step. The snow had tried to erase everything, but it hadn't succeeded completely. Somewhere ahead, hidden beneath white and silence, the truth waited. And for the first time in 2 days, the search felt like it was finally moving in the right direction. The elk tracks pulled everyone forward with a confidence that felt almost reassuring. Searchers moved faster now, energy renewed, boots crunching in steady rhythm as the trail cut through the trees. Radios carried sharper voices, less doubt. The idea was simple and comforting. Follow what survives winter, and it will lead you somewhere safer. But the forest did not promise safety. Evan felt it first, a tightening in his chest as the ground beneath them shifted from packed snow to uneven drifts that swallowed his boots without warning. The tracks continued downhill, but the trees grew closer together, branches sagging under the weight of ice. Light faded quickly, swallowed by shadow and cloud. Lucas paused, scanning the terrain. "This doesn't feel right," he said. Mara didn't respond. She was lagging again, eyes unfocused, lips faintly blue. Her thoughts slipped sideways now, memory blending with fear. At one point she laughed softly, then frowned, confused by the sound coming from her own mouth. "I thought I heard water," she said. "Like a creek." Evan listened. There was nothing but wind. They kept moving anyway. Above them, the helicopter banked sharply, forced to pull back as fog thickened without warning. From the air, the elk trail vanished into white noise, indistinguishable from every other mark the storm had carved into the land. The pilot reported low visibility. Ground teams adjusted their route, trusting the trail more than their own instincts. That trust would cost them time. Down below, the elk tracks split suddenly, scattering in different directions. Evan stopped, heart racing. "They changed direction," he said. "Or something scared them." Lucas knelt, examining the snow. "Or we're not the only ones following them." The thought settled heavy between them. Mara swayed on her feet, then sank down hard, breath hitching. "I can't do this anymore," she said, voice distant, detached. "I just want to sleep." Evan crouched beside her, gripping her shoulders. "No, you can't sleep. Not here." She stared past him, eyes glassy. "Did you know elk don't sleep much in winter?" she asked suddenly. "They keep moving so they don't freeze." Evan didn't know if she was right. He didn't care. He nodded anyway. "That's why we're following them," he said gently. "They know what they're doing." But doubt crept in, quiet and insistent. The trail led them into a shallow basin where snow had collected deep and heavy. Every step became a fight. Lucas slipped once, sliding several feet before catching himself, breath knocked from his lungs. When he stood, his confidence was gone. "We're burning energy," he said. "Too much." Night pressed closer, faster than expected. The sky dimmed, clouds thickening, and with it came a cold that felt sharper, more deliberate. Evan's hands shook uncontrollably now. His thoughts slowed, narrowing to simple needs. Move, breathe, don't stop. Somewhere behind them, the search teams slowed too. Radios carried frustration instead of hope. The elk trail they'd followed so confidently had led into terrain too steep, too broken. A team leader called for reassessment, voices overlapping as the truth settled in. This path might not lead out. Back in the basin, Evan spotted something dark against the snow. He blinked hard, forcing his vision to focus. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a shadow. It was fabric. He stumbled forward, heart pounding, and brushed snow aside with trembling hands. A torn glove lay frozen to the ground, stiff and rimed with ice. Nearby, a crushed energy bar wrapper peeked through the snow. Lucas stared, silent. Mara exhaled a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. They hadn't followed the wrong trail. They had followed it too late. Somewhere close, closer than they realized, was proof they had once stopped moving. And whatever they had built there, the forest had tried very hard to bury it. The campsite revealed itself slowly, as if the forest resisted being honest all at once. What first appeared to be nothing more than uneven snow became shapes upon closer inspection. A shallow hollow beneath low-hanging branches. Snow thinned by heat long gone. Evan dropped to his knees, brushing away ice with shaking hands until frozen ground and scorched bark emerged beneath his fingers. "We were here," he whispered. Lucas stood a few feet away, scanning the area as if expecting the trees to argue. "Not long," he said. "Maybe a night." Mara lowered herself carefully, exhaustion etched into every movement. She stared at the blackened wood, the remains of a fire reduced to brittle charcoal, and something inside her broke open. Proof was worse than uncertainty. Proof meant time had passed. Proof meant mistakes. Searchers arrived minutes later, voices echoing through the trees, boots circling the site with sudden urgency. Radios crackled, coordinates called in. Gloves brushed snow away from half-buried items, a crushed water bottle, torn food packaging, a single damp sock frozen stiff. "They survived at least one night," someone said quietly. The words carried weight. The campsite was small, desperate, assembled from instinct rather than plan. A fallen log blocked the wind. Branches snapped and stacked poorly for shelter. Everything spoke of people who hadn't expected to stay, who believed help or daylight would come quickly. Evan sat heavily against the tree trunk, chest tight. He remembered the fire. The way they'd pressed close, trading body heat, pretending not to notice how violently Mara shivered. He remembered Lucas pacing, swearing under his breath, the sound of the wind stealing warmth faster than the flames could give it. "I told you we should have waited," Mara said suddenly, her voice thin. "Just one more hour." Lucas flinched. "And freeze to death?" The argument replayed itself now, louder in Evan's mind than it ever had been out loud. The truth was cruelly simple. There had been no good choice. Only bad ones, lined up and waiting. A searcher crouched near the edge of the site, frowning. "There's something off," he said. Evan followed his gaze. Beyond the campsite, two clear sets of footprints led away, pressed deep into the snow and heading downhill. Only two. His stomach dropped. Lucas saw it at the same moment. "No," he said. "That's wrong." Mara struggled to her feet, stumbling closer, staring at the tracks as if they might rearrange themselves. "We were all here," she said. "We all left together." But the snow didn't lie. The third set of footprints circled the campsite briefly, overlapping, uneven. They stopped near the fallen tree, where the shelter had been strongest. There were signs of dragging, disturbed snow, a shallow depression where someone had remained. Evan's breath came fast and shallow. He remembered the pain in his leg, the numbness creeping upward. The way standing had become harder each time he tried. He remembered Lucas's face when Evan finally said it out loud. "I'm slowing you down." Lucas shook his head now, as if refusing the memory itself. "We wouldn't leave him." Mara covered her mouth, eyes filling. "He told us to go." Silence fell heavy over the campsite. Even the wind seemed to pause. Searchers exchanged looks, professionals reading the scene with trained eyes. Someone marked the tracks with flags. Someone else placed a gloved hand gently over Evan's shoulder, grounding him in the present. The campsite was no longer just evidence of survival. It was evidence of a choice. As the teams prepared to split their search, following the two sets of tracks downhill while others stayed behind to comb the area around the shelter, the weight of that choice settled in fully. Somewhere beyond the trees, two friends had walked on. And somewhere very close, one had stayed behind, alone with the cold. The snow had preserved the truth just long enough to be found. What it had taken afterward remained to be seen. The memory returned in fragments, sharp and unavoidable. Evan remembered the cold first, not the sting, but the heaviness. The way it settled into his leg after he slipped near the campsite, pain flaring bright before dulling into something worse. Numbness. Lucas had helped him up, swearing, apologizing at the same time. They tried to keep moving, but each step stole more from Evan than he could afford. "I'm slowing you down," he said finally, the words scraping out of him. Lucas refused to look at him. "You're not." But they both knew. Mara stood nearby, shaking so badly her teeth chattered. Her eyes were unfocused, her lips blue. Evan saw it clearly then, not fear, but the edge beyond it, where the body begins to shut down. He thought of daylight that hadn't come soon enough, of fires that hadn't lasted, of how every choice had narrowed until there was only one left. "Go," Evan said. "Just follow the tracks. You'll get out." Lucas turned on him, anger breaking through exhaustion. "We don't leave people." Evan forced himself to meet his eyes. "You don't stay and die either." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind clawing at the shelter. Mara sank down, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I can't keep walking," she whispered. "I really can't." That decided it. Evan dragged himself closer to the fallen tree, pressing his back against the rough bark where the wind couldn't reach as easily. He peeled off his gloves with stiff fingers and pushed them toward Lucas. "You'll need these," he said. "I won't." Lucas shook his head, horror flooding his face. "Stop talking like that." Evan smiled, small and tired. "Just listen to me for once." He told them where to go. Downhill. Follow the elk tracks until they hit water or an opening. Don't stop. Don't turn back. He repeated it until Lucas nodded, until Mara whispered she understood. The goodbye was quick, because anything longer would have broken them. Lucas squeezed Evan's shoulder, hard, like an apology he couldn't say out loud. Mara pressed her forehead against Evan's, her skin cold and damp. "I'm sorry," she said, voice barely there. Evan watched them leave, their figures shrinking as they followed the tracks into the trees. He stayed upright until they were gone, then let himself slide down into the snow, breath shuddering out of him. The forest closed in. Time lost its shape after that. Evan drifted in and out, waking to pain, to silence, to the sound of his own breathing growing slower. He tried to move once, dragging himself a few feet before exhaustion pinned him back down. The cold wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, stealing sensation, then thought. He thought about Christmas lights, about laughter, about how ordinary everything had been before the mountains decided otherwise. When searchers arrived later, they read the story clearly in the snow. The shelter, the dragging marks, the place where Evan had stayed. They followed the two sets of tracks downhill with urgency now sharpened by dread. Evan, somewhere between waking and sleep, heard something distant. A sound that didn't belong. Voices. Or maybe wind shaped like voices. He couldn't tell. What mattered was that the choice had been made. Two friends were still moving. And because of that, somewhere beyond the trees, life still had a chance to continue. The voices came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Lucas heard them first, faint and unreal, carried on the wind as he and Mara stumbled along the frozen creek bed. He stopped suddenly, heart hammering, afraid hope was playing tricks on him again. The cold had done that before, shaped sound into memory, turned silence into comfort. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Mara lifted her head slowly, eyes swollen, lashes rimed with ice. She listened, breath shallow, then nodded once. "That's not the wind," Lucas shouted, the sound tearing out of his throat, raw and desperate. "Help!" The word disappeared into the trees. Then came the reply. "Over here." It was real. Too clear to ignore. Mara sank to her knees, a broken sob escaping her as relief and exhaustion collided. Lucas pulled her up again, fear sharpening his movements. "Stay with me," he said. "Just a little more." Figures emerged through the white, dark shapes against the snow. Bright jackets. Helmets. Human outlines that felt impossible after days of emptiness. A searcher reached them first, hands firm, voice steady and calm. "We've got you," he said. "You're safe now." Mara collapsed into his arms, shaking uncontrollably. Lucas stood frozen for a moment longer, scanning the trees behind them, the question already forming in his mind. "Did you?" His voice cracked. He swallowed hard. "Did you find Evan?" The searcher's expression shifted, just slightly. Professional. Careful. "Not yet," he said. "We're still looking." That was the answer Lucas expected. It still felt like a blow. They were wrapped in blankets, guided downhill, their movements slow and clumsy. Hands checked pulses, faces, fingers, toes. Someone placed oxygen over Mara's face, murmuring reassurance. Lucas barely heard it. His eyes kept drifting back toward the forest, toward the direction they'd come from. As they were loaded into the rescue vehicle, Lucas twisted around, ignoring the ache screaming through his body. "He stayed behind," he said urgently. "Near a fallen tree. He couldn't walk." The words tasted like betrayal. The team leader nodded, already relaying information into a radio. "We know," she said. "We're going to him." The vehicle door closed, sealing them in warmth that felt undeserved. As it started moving, Lucas rested his forehead against the cold glass, watching the trees slide past. Every bump in the road sent pain through him, but he welcomed it. Pain meant he was still here. Mara slept fitfully beside him, murmuring Evan's name under her breath. Above them, search teams pushed harder now, urgency cutting through fatigue. The elk tracks, the campsite, the split path, all of it pointed back toward one place. Toward the choice Evan had made. When Lucas and Mara reached the base camp, floodlights illuminated the snow like daylight. Paramedics worked quickly, efficiently. Questions came later, after vitals stabilized, after frostbitten skin was treated and core temperatures rose. Still, Lucas asked again. And again. Each time, the answer remained the same. As night fell once more over the mountains, helicopters hovered low, scanning tree lines with powerful beams. Searchers moved carefully around the fallen tree, reading the snow with quiet precision. Somewhere in that white silence, the forest held its breath. Lucas sat alone on a stretcher, blanket wrapped tight, staring into the dark. Survival felt hollow without certainty. He closed his eyes, hearing Evan's voice in his memory, steady and calm, telling him to keep moving. Now all he could do was wait. And hope the mountains hadn't taken everything. They found Evan just after dawn, when the light finally reached the forest floor. He lay beneath the fallen tree, exactly where the track said he would be, sheltered from the worst of the wind by the curve of the trunk. Snow had gathered gently over him, softening the edges of his body, preserving the shape of someone who had stopped moving only after fighting very hard not to. A rescuer knelt beside him, brushing snow away with slow, careful hands. There were no signs of struggle at the end. No panic frozen into his expression. Evan's face was calm, almost peaceful, as if sleep had taken him quietly once the cold finished its work. They stood in silence for a long moment, professionals trained for this outcome but never untouched by it. He stayed alive as long as he could, someone said softly. The evidence supported it. The shelter had been reinforced after Lucas and Mara left. The fire pit showed signs of being rebuilt. Evan had tried to keep going. Tried to wait. Tried to make space for rescue that came just a little too late. When the news reached the base camp, it landed gently and cruelly all at once. Lucas heard it first. He didn't cry. He simply closed his eyes and nodded, as if confirming something he had known since the moment he walked away. Mara woke later, confusion flickering across her face before understanding settled in. Her sob was quiet but relentless, a sound pulled from somewhere deep and permanent. In the days that followed, the story took shape. Investigators mapped the route again, placing markers where footprints appeared and vanished. The elk tracks became a footnote, then a headline. Experts explained how animals choose paths that humans rarely notice, how instinct guides survival more efficiently than planning ever could. But no explanation softened the truth. Evan had stayed behind so the others could live. At the memorial, photos from college years lined the walls. Evan smiling at parties. Evan hiking under blue skies. Evan caught mid-laugh, unaware of the weight his final decision would carry. His parents sat in the front row, holding hands, listening as people spoke about kindness, responsibility, loyalty. No one used the word hero. They didn't need to. Lucas spoke last. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. He talked about how Evan always walked a little slower, how he noticed things others missed. How, on Christmas night, he had stayed calm when fear threatened to tear them apart. He told us to keep moving, Lucas said. So we did. Mara couldn't speak. She wore Evan's gloves, fingers still too sensitive for the cold months later. She said she wore them to remember warmth. The mountains returned to silence once the story faded from the news cycle. Snow melted. Trails reopened. New footprints layered over old ones until nothing remained to mark what had happened there. But for those who knew, the forest was never empty again. Sometimes survival stories end with celebration. This one ended with understanding. Nature had not been cruel or kind. It had simply been vast, indifferent, and unforgiving of hesitation. The snow had erased nearly everything, but not the truth. What it kept was a record of endurance. A decision made under unbearable pressure. A life given so others could continue. And every Christmas after that, when snow fell quietly and the world seemed momentarily still, 3 families remembered a night when silence meant everything. The mountains stood unchanged, but the people who walked away from them never were.